Hagerty, step away from the desk. Come here.
Do you have any idea what I do for these men in this office?
For 11 years, Curtis Lane Hagerty was the man Spokane's most vulnerable veterans were told to trust with everything. What investigators found in his fiduciary accounts is the reason he's being placed in handcuffs right now.
Money, Curtis, the benefits you were supposed to manage.
I have run this office for 11 years since before you had a badge. You do not get to
6
walk
veterans, more than $500,000 gone.
The confrontation on his front porch ended the way it always does. Hands up, voice cracking. A question about whether he needed a lawyer. He did. By the time the first officer knocked, federal investigators had already spent 9 months tracing every deposit, every signature, every falsified line item Curtis Lane Hagerty had filed with the Department of Veterans Affairs. 6 victim veterans, roughly $560,000, and a single sheet of paper, a 2022 annual fiduciary accounting, signed and dated for a man who had been dead for 3 months. The base boat parked in his driveway was still registered to the name he had used to hide it. The timeshare in Coeur d'Alene was paid for with a veteran's disability compensation. And on the credenza in his home office, agents would find the next year's forms already half completed. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Would you be able to spot the man in this case if you sat across from him at a VFW pancake breakfast? Because his neighbors could not, his co-workers could not, the Department of Veterans Affairs could not. Drop a comment and tell me how you think a man like this operates for 11 years without anyone catching on. And if you have not subscribed yet, go do that now. This channel covers accountability cases every single week, and the ones involving veterans hit harder than most. Curtis Lane Hagerty was born in the summer of 1975 in Colville, Washington, a small logging town about 70 miles north of Spokane in the shadow of the Selkirk Mountains. His father worked at the Wagon Brothers sawmill on the edge of town. His mother clerked at the county courthouse in the property records office. There was 1 high school, 1 grocery store, and 2 churches, and Curtis grew up understanding both what a paycheck cost and how paperwork worked. His father lost the ring finger on his right hand to a bandsaw when Curtis was 8, and the workers' compensation paperwork that followed took 19 months to process. Curtis watched his mother sit at the kitchen table with a pen and a legal pad, translating what the state was asking for into something her husband could sign. That was the first time he understood that forms could be either a lifeline or a wall, depending on who was helping you fill them out. He graduated from Colville High School in 1993, second in a class of 87, and enlisted in the United States Army 4 days later. His recruiter was a Gulf War veteran who drove up from Spokane once a week and worked out of a folding table in the school's guidance office. Curtis signed for a 5-year contract as a 42A human resources specialist. The recruiter told his mother that Curtis had scored high enough on the ASVAB to pick almost anything, and that human resources was a smart pick for a kid who wanted to come home and get a government job someday. The recruiter was correct on both counts. Basic training was Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Advanced individual training was Fort Jackson as well. His first assignment was Fort Lewis, 40 miles south of Tacoma, where he spent his afternoons pulling personnel files, updating pay records, and processing separation packets for soldiers on their way out. His performance reviews from that period describe him as meticulous, unfailingly patient with soldiers navigating administrative issues, and possessing a rare aptitude for translating bureaucratic requirements into plain language. He was promoted to sergeant in his 4th year. He deployed once to Kuwait in a support role and came home with a Good Conduct Medal, an Army Commendation Medal, and a permanent hearing loss in his left ear that would later become a 10% VA rating of his own. He was honorably discharged in 1998, moved to Spokane, and enrolled at Spokane Falls Community College on the GI Bill. He earned an associate's degree in business administration in the spring of 2000. That summer, he took a job as an intake clerk at the Disabled American Veterans Chapter Service Office on North Monroe Street, where he made $12.35 an hour, helping walk-in veterans start their VA claims. He was, by every account, exceptional at it. Veterans who came in confused left with a stack of neatly labeled folders and a follow-up date written in his careful block handwriting. his supervisor at DAV, would later tell investigators that Curtis was the only intake clerk she had ever hired who volunteered to come in on Saturdays. He married Kimberly Ann Reardon in September of 2001, 2 weeks before the towers fell. Kimberly was a dental hygienist at a practice on East Sprague. They bought a small ranch house on the South Hill in 2003 for $142,000, and their daughter Madeline was born the following spring. Their son Nathan followed in 2006. By every outward measure, Curtis Hagerty was building the kind of quiet, careful life a small-town kid from Colville was supposed to build. In 2007, he completed his accreditation as a Veteran Service Officer through the National Association of County Veteran Service Officers, a 5-day training program held that year in Portland. He kept the certificate framed in his office. In 2013, after 6 years of climbing through the DAV service office and a 2-year detour as a benefit specialist at the Spokane VA Regional Office, he was hired as a full-time County Veteran Service Officer by Spokane County. His starting salary was $52,400. His performance evaluations from his first 3 years in that position describe him as the most requested CVSO in the office, consistently exceeds expectations on claim development, and a genuine asset to the county's veteran population. He was named Regional Advocate of the Year in 2016. He was named Advocate of the Year again in 2019. He sat on the Spokane County Aging and Long-Term Care Advisory Board beginning in 2018 and served as its vice chair from 2020 to 2022. He wore a Navy Service Organization polo shirt to the monthly VFW pancake breakfast at Post 51 on North Monroe. He carried business cards printed on heavy cream stock with the county seal embossed in gold. He knew the first names of the janitors at the regional VA Medical Center. He remembered which veterans took cream in their coffee. And when a veteran in his caseload was found to be legally incapable of managing his own disability compensation because of dementia, or a traumatic brain injury, or PTSD, so severe the VA determined that money placed in his own hands would not survive the month, Curtis Hagerty was the man the Department of Veterans Affairs appointed to manage that veteran's money on his behalf. The VA calls that role a fiduciary. It is one of the deepest trusts the federal government places in a single private citizen. And by the summer of 2018, Curtis Hagerty held that trust over 6 of them. The Department of Veterans Affairs fiduciary program exists because there are veterans whose service left them unable to manage the very benefits their service earned. A retired staff sergeant with dementia, a young private with a traumatic brain injury from an IED, a Marine whose PTSD is severe enough that the VA has rated him 100% disabled and simultaneously judged that giving him unrestricted access to a bank account would be dangerous. For those veterans, roughly 150,000 of them nationwide, the VA appoints a fiduciary to receive and manage their monthly compensation on their behalf. The system was built to be careful. In theory, every fiduciary must complete a background check. Every fiduciary must open a dedicated bank account in a specific legal form, their own name as fiduciary, in trust for the veteran, with the veteran's VA file number attached. Every dollar deposited into that account is supposed to be spent on the veteran's housing, medical needs, personal care items, and reasonable comforts. Every year, the fiduciary must file an annual accounting with a regional fiduciary hub, a document listing every deposit received, every dollar spent, and the itemized purpose of each expense, signed under penalty of perjury under the federal false statement statute. In practice, the fiduciary program is a system stretched thin. A single VA fiduciary hub in Western Washington oversees thousands of fiduciary relationships across multiple states. Field examiners are supposed to visit each veteran at least annually. The visits often last less than an hour. The annual accountings arrive by the tens of thousands and are reviewed by a small staff. If the numbers on the page balance and the fiduciary signs the certification, the paperwork moves on. When a veteran cannot speak for himself, when there is no family member calling to check, when the facility bill is paid on time and the fiduciary is a respected county employee who signs the forms the same way every year, the system runs on trust. The vulnerability was not hidden. It was the structural design. A fiduciary who paid the rent on time and filed neat annual accountings could siphon the difference for years before anyone noticed. The only person who could see the discrepancy in real time, the veteran, was, by legal definition, the person the VA had already determined could not. For a Spokane County Veterans Service officer who had spent a decade helping veterans get rated in the first place, the mechanics were not a mystery. They were his job. The first fiduciary appointment came in March of 2018. The veteran, identified in the federal indictment only by his initials RT, was a 72-year-old Army veteran of Vietnam. RT had been rated 100% disabled for dementia secondary to a documented in-service head injury. He had no children, no living siblings, and a single nephew who lived in Bellingham, 4 hours west. RT was living in a memory care wing at an assisted living facility in Spokane Valley called Willow Ridge. His monthly VA disability compensation, at the 100% single veteran rate, ran a little over $3,800. His rent at Willow Ridge in 2018 was $2,950. Curtis Hagerty opened the required fiduciary account at a Numerica Credit Union branch on East Sprague, in the correct legal form. Curtis L. Hagerty, fiduciary for the benefit of RT. VA file number attached. The VA rerouted RT as direct deposit into that account. Hagerty set up an automatic monthly transfer of $2,950 to Willow Ridge on the 5th of each month. The remaining $850 stayed in the account. That was his margin. For the first 6 months, he touched none of it. Investigators would later note this as a pattern he repeated with every one of his 6 victims. He let the balance build. He waited to see if anyone would ask. No one did. In September of 2018, he made his first withdrawal, $400 in cash from a Numerica ATM on North Division Street at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning. In October, he took $600. In November, $800. By January of 2019, he had linked a personal debit card to the fiduciary account and had begun using it for fuel purchases, restaurant meals in Post Falls and Coeur d'Alene, and a recurring monthly charge of $142 to a Cabela's Club account. RT's Willow Ridge rent was paid on time every month. RT's nephew, when he called at Christmas, was told his uncle was doing as well as could be expected under the circumstances. That was, in the narrow sense the nephew heard it, true. The second appointment came in November of 2019. J.M. was 41 years old, an Army veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, and had suffered a traumatic brain injury in a mortar attack outside Kandahar in 2011. His speech was slow. His short-term memory ended most days by 3 in the afternoon. He was rated 100% disabled and lived in a specialized brain injury group home on the north side of Spokane. His mother, in Yakima, had originally been the fiduciary. When her own health declined, the VA reassigned the role to Curtis Hagerty on her recommendation. She had met him at a family workshop he had led 2 years earlier. She trusted him because everyone in the veteran community did. By the end of 2020, Hagerty held fiduciary appointments over 4 veterans. By the end of 2022, 6. Each account followed the same architecture. The facility rent was paid on time. The remainder, sometimes $800 a month, sometimes $1,500, sometimes more when a veteran received a retroactive rating adjustment, bled out through ATM withdrawals, debit card purchases, and checks written to cash or to a company he had registered with the Washington Secretary of State in February of 2020 called Cascade Veteran Care Management, LLC. Cascade had no employees. It had no clients. It had no office. It had a single business bank account at Washington Trust Bank on Riverside Avenue, and its listed business address was a UPS store mailbox on East Sprague. It existed to receive checks Curtis Hagerty wrote to himself. He was patient. He was consistent. He did not spend recklessly at first. In 2020, the withdrawals totaled roughly $36,000 across 4 accounts. In 2021, $61,000 across 5. In 2022, $94,000 across 6. In 2023, $111,000. He was moving up a curve. The escalation showed up in his life the way it always does. In the summer of 2021, he paid $29,000 in cash for a used Ranger bass boat, registered it in his own name, and moored it at a slip on Lake Coeur. In 2022, he purchased a 1/8 timeshare in a lakefront condominium in Coeur d'Alene for $47,000, financing part of it and paying the down payment in a series of cashier's checks drawn on the Cascade Veteran Care Management account. Between 2020 and 2024, he opened players' cards at 2 regional tribal casinos and logged more than 400 visits between them, ranging from a $50 Wednesday afternoon to a $6,000 Saturday night. His W-2 from Spokane County listed a gross annual salary of $78,600. Each year, on the anniversary of each fiduciary appointment, he sat down at his desk and filled out the VA Form 21P4706B, the annual accounting of funds. He listed personal needs allowance line items that never existed. He listed in-home aid services for veterans in group homes where no aides were ever hired. He listed medical copays that had been billed directly to Medicare. He attached fabricated expense ledgers printed from a template he had built himself, and he signed each form under the standard federal certification. I certify under penalty of perjury that the foregoing is true and correct to the best of my knowledge and belief. The most damning fabrication came in early 2023. Veteran W.D., a Marine Corps veteran of the Gulf War, had died at a hospice facility in Airway Heights on October 14, 2022. Federal regulation required Curtis Hagerty, as fiduciary, to notify the VA fiduciary hub of the death within 30 days and to return any benefits paid after the date of death. He did neither. The November deposit landed in the account. So did the December. So did the January. So did the February. So did the March. 5 monthly payments totaling more than $19,000 deposited into a fiduciary account for a man who was already buried at the Washington State Veterans Cemetery in Medical Lake. On February 27, 2023, Curtis Hagerty signed and mailed the 2022 annual fiduciary accounting for veteran W.D. He certified that in October of 2022, he had spent $3,815 on the veteran's personal care and comfort. W.D. had been dead for 3 months. That same week, the debit card attached to the account was used at a marina fuel dock on Lake Coeur d'Alene and at a restaurant on Sherman Avenue. In November of 2024, 6 years into the scheme, the business office at Willow Ridge. Assisted Living tried to run the monthly rent payment for resident RT. The check bounced. It had not bounced because the fiduciary account was empty. Investigators would later determine there was a little over $400 in it, short of the $2,950 rent by more than $2,000. It bounced because Curtis Hagerty, for the first time in 6 years, had gotten sloppy with his timing. A weekend casino trip the prior Saturday had drawn the balance below what the automatic rent transfer required, and the deposit for the next month's VA compensation would not land for another 11 days. The bookkeeper at Willow Ridge, a woman named Deanna Merrill, who had worked in senior living finance for 19 years, did what her procedure manual told her to do. She left a voicemail for the fiduciary listed in the file. She left a second voicemail 48 hours later. She sent an email. She sent a second email. And on the following Monday, when Curtis Hagerty had still not returned her calls, she pulled up the emergency contact for the resident and dialed the number listed for a nephew in Bellingham. The nephew's name was Trevor Mahoney. He was 37, a supply chain manager at a Boeing subcontractor in the Puget Sound region, and he had not seen his uncle RT in person since a family reunion in 2019. He had assumed, for the intervening years, exactly what he had been told to assume, that his uncle's finances were handled, that a professional was in charge, that the man he called on Christmas and on the 4th of July was, in the practical sense, being cared for. Deanna Merrill's phone call blew that assumption apart in 11 minutes. Trevor Mahoney did not call Curtis Hagerty first. He called Willow Ridge and asked for a copy of the resident's billing history for the last 12 months. He then called the VA regional office in Spokane and asked to speak with the fiduciary hub. He was on hold for 41 minutes. When he finally reached a hub representative, he asked a single question. What is the process for requesting a full audit of a fiduciary account? The representative walked him through the complaint form. He filed the complaint with the VA Office of Inspector General on the morning of December 3, 2024. It ran 3 pages. He attached the Willow Ridge billing history. He listed his uncle's monthly VA compensation as reported in a Social Security summary. He did the subtraction. He wrote, in the narrative section, the sentence that would end Curtis Hagerty's career. For 6 years, I was told this was being handled. It appears nothing has been handled at all. The complaint was assigned to a VA OIG special agent named Nicole Baird out of the Seattle field office. She read it on a Thursday afternoon. She ran Curtis Hagerty's name through the fiduciary database that evening. She saw 6 active appointments. She saw 1 deceased veteran with continuing deposits. And she picked up her phone and called the Assistant United States Attorney assigned to elder financial exploitation cases in the Eastern District of Washington. We are about to get into how federal investigators actually build a case like this. Before we do, if you have made it this far, hit that subscribe button. This channel does not look away from these stories, and the ones involving veterans and elders do not get the coverage they deserve. Leave a comment and tell me where you are watching from. Then stay with me, because the paper trail this man left behind is somehow worse than the theft itself. Nicole Baird did not knock on Curtis Hagerty's door for 9 months. That is not how these cases are built. She started with paper. On December 19, 2024, VA OIG issued administrative subpoenas to Numerica Credit Union, Washington Trust Bank, and 2 smaller regional institutions for every account with Curtis L. Hagerty's name attached, in any legal capacity, going back to 2016. She subpoenaed the direct deposit records from the VA Treasury for every fiduciary appointment Hagerty had held. She pulled the annual accountings he had filed with the fiduciary hub. She requested certified death records from the Washington State Department of Health for every veteran on his caseload. The pattern came together in the first 8 weeks. A forensic accountant seconded to the OIG from the Treasury Department, a woman named Priya Ramaswamy, laid the fiduciary accounting side by side with the actual bank statements and began circling discrepancies in red pen. For veteran RT, the 2021 accounting claimed $1,140 in monthly personal needs allowance. The bank statements showed no such disbursements. Instead, they showed ATM withdrawals in the same amounts on the same weeks. For veteran JM, the 2022 accounting claimed $900 a month in in-home aid services. Investigators subpoenaed the group home where JM lived. There were no aides. There had never been aides. The group home provided all care through its own staff, billed directly to the facility rent Hagerty was paying. The WD file was the one that ended any chance of a plea to a lesser charge. Baird pulled WD as death certificate, October 14, 2022. She pulled the VA Fiduciary Hub notification records. Hagerty had reported the death on April 3, 2023, 5 months and 20 days late. She pulled the deposit history. 5 monthly VA compensation payments had landed after the date of death, totaling $19,075. She pulled the 2022 annual accounting Hagerty had filed for WD. It was dated February 27, 2023. It certified, on a form that carried a felony penalty for false statements, that Curtis Hagerty had spent $3,815 in October of 2022 on the veteran's personal care and comfort. She cross-referenced the debit card transactions for the same week. Fuel dock on Lake Coeur, restaurant on Sherman Avenue, a liquor store in Post Falls. She had her aggravated identity theft count. By March of 2025, VA OIG and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Washington had traced roughly $560,000 in losses across 6 victim veterans. Investigators identified a used Ranger base boat purchased in 2021 for $29,000 in cash, a 1/8 timeshare in a lakefront condominium in Coeur d'Alene, purchased in 2022 for $47,000, Players' card records from 2 tribal casinos showing 411 visits and coin-in of more than $300,000 across the 4-year window. Roughly $200,000 in cash withdrawals that had left the accounts and never returned in any traceable form. They also had the shell company, Cascade Veteran Care Management, LLC. Its registered agent was Curtis Hagerty. Its business address was a UPS store mailbox. Its bank account had received $142,000 in checks written from the fiduciary accounts of veterans it had never met, never served, and never provided a single hour of care for. On the morning of March 18, 2025, at 6:41 a.m., 3 vehicles pulled up in front of Curtis Hagerty's ranch house on the South Hill in Spokane. 2 were unmarked federal sedans. The third was a Spokane police cruiser assigned to assist with the entry. The arrest team consisted of Special Agent Nicole Baird, a second VA OIG agent, an FBI agent seconded to the investigation, and 2 uniformed officers. Curtis Hagerty answered the door in a gray sweatshirt and khaki pants. He was already dressed for work. He had a cup of coffee in his left hand. His wife Kimberly was in the kitchen behind him, out of frame of the body cam that would later become the record of the moment. Curtis Hagerty? Yes, ma'am. I'm Special Agent Nicole Baird with the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General. We have a federal warrant for your arrest. I need you to step outside and put the coffee down, please. There was a pause of maybe 4 seconds. He did not look surprised. He looked, according to the officers present, like a man who had been waiting for this specific knock for a specific number of months and had not been surprised that it finally arrived. Can I tell my wife? Sir, we need you to step outside first. I understand. I'd like to know if I need an attorney. You have the right to an attorney, sir. That right is explained to you on the card I'm about to read. Please step outside. He stepped outside. He set the coffee cup on the porch railing. He turned around when he was told to. He put his hands behind his back when he was told to. He did not run. He did not raise his voice. He said, as the cuffs went on, one sentence that Baird would later describe in her report as the closest thing to a confession she received all morning. I know why you're here. He said nothing else on the ride downtown. When his attorney arrived at the federal courthouse that afternoon, Curtis Hagerty invoked. He has not spoken to investigators since. A federal grand jury sitting in Spokane returned a sealed indictment against Curtis Lane Hagerty on March 11, 2025, 1 week before his arrest. The indictment was unsealed the afternoon of the 18th. It contained 14 counts, 6 counts of theft of government money under Title 18, United States Code, Section 641, 1 for each of the 6 victim veterans whose disability compensation had been diverted. 6 counts of wire fraud under Title 18, Section 1343, for the electronic transfers and the electronically filed false accountings, and 2 counts of aggravated identity theft under Title 18, Section 1028A, 1 for the continuing use of veteran W.D. as identifying information to draw federal benefits after his death, and 1 for a similar continuing use in the case of a second deceased veteran whose fiduciary appointment Hagerty had held. The wire fraud counts each carry a statutory maximum of 20 years in federal prison. The aggravated identity theft counts each carry a mandatory consecutive term of 2 years, which cannot be reduced, cannot run concurrent to any other sentence, and cannot be probated. Under the federal sentencing guidelines as calculated by the U.S. Attorney's Office in its detention memo, Curtis Hagerty faces a guideline range that begins in the mid-single digits of years and rises significantly with the identity theft consecutive terms and the vulnerable victim enhancement that applies when the victims are, by legal definition, incapable of protecting themselves. Hagerty appeared at his initial appearance the same afternoon he was arrested. He was represented by a Spokane defense attorney named Alexander Whitcomb, a former assistant federal defender with 2 decades of white-collar experience. Whitcomb consented to detention pending a full hearing, then negotiated a release on the condition that Hagerty surrender his United States passport, wear a GPS monitor, refrain from contacting any veteran on his former caseload, or any family member of any such veteran, and post his home on the South Hill as a property bond. The court accepted the conditions. Hagerty walked out of the federal courthouse late that evening. He has been on release since. He has not entered a plea. Prosecutors, in the detention memo, laid out the impact in a way that the pre-sentencing report will eventually echo. The nephew, Trevor Mahoney, wrote a letter to the court that has not yet been read at any hearing, but that has been filed publicly. He wrote that his uncle R.T. was moved from Willow Ridge in February of 2025 because Willow Ridge could no longer be paid, that no money remained in the fiduciary account to cover the transition, and that R.T., in the last months of his life, was moved into a lower level of memory care at a state-run facility because the private facility he had lived in since 2018 was no longer financially available to him. R.T. died on July 9, 2025, 4 months before Curtis Hagerty's arraignment. The mother of veteran J.M., the young post-9/11 veteran with the traumatic brain injury, wrote a separate letter. She wrote that she had been told, in 2023, that there was no money left in her son's account to pay for a specialized rehabilitation program he had qualified for and been accepted into. She had believed, at the time, that his monthly compensation was insufficient to cover both his group home and the program. She had grieved a decision she had made not to fight harder for him. She now knew, she wrote, that the money had been there every month. It had been in a base boat. It had been in a timeshare. It had been on a casino floor. The families of the 4 other veterans have not spoken publicly. Curtis Hagerty is expected to be arraigned on the indictment at a hearing later this year. As of this reporting, he has not entered a plea. The charges are allegations. Under the federal system, he is presumed innocent until a jury determines otherwise, or until he chooses to enter a plea of his own. Prosecutors have indicated they will seek restitution for the full traced loss of $560,000, forfeiture of the base boat, forfeiture of the timeshare interest, and forfeiture of any additional traceable proceeds identified before trial. His employment with Spokane County ended the day of his arrest. His CVSO accreditation has been suspended by the National Association of County Veterans Service Officers pending the outcome of the case. His name has been removed from the 2 Advocate of the Year plaques that hung in the lobby of the Regional Veterans Coalition office. The plaques themselves have been retired. There is one detail that has not been printed anywhere yet, but that appears in the government's initial disclosure. When agents executed the search warrant on Curtis Hagerty's home office the morning of his arrest, on the credenza behind his desk, they found a stack of blank VA fiduciary accounting forms, pre-printed with the file numbers of the veterans on his caseload, and a legal pad on which he had already begun drafting the 2024 annual accountings. The top form on the stack bore the file number of veteran W.D. Bees, the Marine who had been dead since October of 2022. Hagerty had been preparing to certify, under penalty of perjury, for the 3rd consecutive year, that he had spent the previous year caring for a man who was buried in Medical Lake. The disguise was the job, the safeguard was the thief. And the man other veterans had been told to go see turned out to be the reason they had nothing left. This case was hard to sit with, but the case on your screen right now is worse. Click it and see for yourself.